academic work. Actually, at some point, my chair at that point told me very explicitly that we don't do international work here, so you better find something else to do. I love that. They hire you for who you are, and then they tell you to be something else. Community-engaged scholarship was also another type of non-traditional research context that was devalued. I do a lot of stuff with community, and I think the university appreciates that, but they appreciate it, but it doesn't count the same as if somebody was publishing an article. And it also applies to those doing socially engaged scholarship. And this is a long quote, but it really hits a lot of the core issues. Individuals who have research programs that are more problem-oriented, less theoretical, that deal with social issues that are not the traditional theoretical questions of the field, are treated as second-class citizens compared to those that do more traditional theory-based research. And there tends to be an overlap, an ethnic racial overlap in this. People from underrepresented groups tend to want to do research that's relevant to some of the social problems, and that research might not be along the lines of the more traditional frameworks or frames of reference. So it's hard to say what's the cause and what's the effect. Is the disdain for problem-directed research a form of channeling racial and ethnic prejudice, or is it a true value system that differs in terms of valuing theory-driven research more than problem-oriented, applied research? So it's hard to tell because there's an overlap in the individuals that tend to gravitate towards problem-oriented applied research. More persons of color go that way, for background reasons and for values that they're bringing in before they even adopt an academic career. Now this participant is asking for an either-or answer here, but perhaps it doesn't need to actually go as an either-or response. Maybe it's not a question of whether or not values, scholarly values at least, are driving this, or is it who's doing the research that's driving these opinions about the research. Epistemic exclusion proposes that what's most likely is that it's both. That they're devaluing the problem-oriented social justice research because it is being conducted by and for racial ethnic minority faculty. And another way that formal hierarchies contributed to epistemic exclusion was through changing and unclear standards and expectations. For example, shifting standards of what is needed for promotion and tenure, as this quote illustrates. The first year I was here, everybody I asked gave me a different number of publications, and they were all bigger and bigger and bigger. And then I asked the same person again, and they gave me an even bigger number. It was like the carrot kept moving. I decided that I had no other choice besides to run and sprint, right? Get as much out as I could, do everything I could within reason, and just see where the chips fall. What's interesting is this was captured by several of the participants. Many of them talked about this idea of they say the tenure expectations are really clear, but that it keeps being a moving target. And ironically, that target kept moving every time they actually hit the target. So others talked about how they had only vague or unclear ideas of what was expected of them. There was an expectation that you would publish in certain journals, in certain areas, and so we asked the dean, well, what are those journals? Which ones are the ones we should be shooting for? Which ones are the ones we should avoid? His response, we can't answer that question. So you have an expectation that you can't possibly meet, essentially. So both the moving targets and the lack of clarity make it difficult for faculty of color to meet the expectations of their disciplines and be successful in this academic context. Formal hierarchies of epistemic exclusion also were reflected in the need for grants. And participants talked about the need for external grants as creating this hierarchy of who in the department would be valued, as these three very short quotes will show you. In my department, how do I want to phrase this? Well, first and foremost, you're valued if you bring in money. So in that sense, no, I'm not valued right now because I haven't brought in any money. So I'm just trying to be fair. I'm trying to think of a fair way to say it. No, I can't be valued because I don't generate revenue that's necessary. For people to value you, well, I guess that's all I'll say. My department values me now, right? and the current chair values me now. But on the other hand, you gotta see what I brought in. I brought in 1.4 million in a whisper. So this idea of this valuation was mentioned by people throughout the fields, largely in the STEM fields, but also many of the social sciences talked heavily about the use of grants to establish a hierarchy of value. And these multiple quotes show that these pauses and the difficulties they were having in finding the words and getting it out, that when they talk about how grants are establishing their value, they're trying to communicate something that is so amorphous that they struggle, academics struggle to find words. And yet another of the formal hierarchies that were creating epistemic exclusion was by granting certain journals or publishers higher status, and thus conferring greater value to those who do publish in those spaces, and devaluing the work of faculty of color and not understanding that the work faculty of color produce are often unwelcome in those journals. And this was evident in a number of ways. It was evident in the listing of what are the top journals and the consideration of impact factors, the devaluation of race ethnic journals, the focus on citation counts, and all sorts of ways in which scholarship was evaluated. They're trying to determine through a combination of impact factors and citations and all these things, which citations really kind of matter and which ones don't. That's going to always leave people who do non-traditional research on the margins. Always. There is a deliberate change where they're trying to articulate what are the top journals and want everybody publishing in those top journals, which, once again, always feels marginalizing because, you know, the top journals are not in any of the specialty journals. The journals that are top for ethnic minority studies don't have the same impact factor because they don't have the same circulation. So the plethora of formal manifestations of epistemic exclusion make the tenure and promotion process incredibly difficult to navigate, especially given that those faculty who do indeed actually hit these marks even then find that the target just keeps moving on them, and they don't get the same kind of information nor the same kind of opportunities to foster success. So those were some of the formal ways that epistemic exclusion manifested, but it also was brought about through everyday conversations and various informal ways that they were told that they didn't have the same value. For some, I'm going to first share just some of the very generalized quotes. I remember there were many, many foot-and-mouth moments that really made it clear how little he valued the research I did, or valued me, or valued my group. But he was very, very powerful, very prolific, brought in tons of grant money. There was nothing to be done. It's very ironic in a department like this because people are nice, good, caring liberals. But liberal racism means they do a lot of benevolent stuff, or they do a lot of stuff under the carpet, and they don't even acknowledge it. Ways that they discount your abilities or your personhood, and they just discount your very presence. Now, as somebody who's either done the interviews or transcribed the interviews and heard their voices, it's still painful to read some of these. You might get this 0.5% raise or something ridiculous. People generally get caught up when their salary is so far below everybody else at the same rank that they then get a salary adjustment. And it's not even a raise to recognize your work. It's saying, we've been paying you so little compared to what we pay everybody else, we need to bring you back into the fold. It feels good to get a raise, but it's not the same thing as saying, you have merit. We value you in this department. We value what you bring, so we're going to compensate you for it. It's very demoralizing to not get raises that reflect what you do. You have a year where you get 5, 8 publications out, but you still get a little pittance raise. It feels like a slap in the face. Informally, epistemic exclusion was communicated also by faculty not having their accomplishments recognized, even when they were meeting those formal metrics by the departments. And they were looking for recognition in a variety of different ways, not only through formal things like the salary increases and merit raises, and not only things like promotion and tenure, but also getting written or online mentions, being recognized on the website, getting verbal praise from colleagues. You're invisible. Your accomplishments are invisible. If you don't accomplish them, now then you will stand out. But otherwise, you're just doing what you're supposed to be doing, even though it's more than what other people are doing. So here the participant provides an example of faculty of color not having their successes recognized in the ways that others' successes are recognized. And this consequence of feeling invisible within that setting and of not mattering whatsoever. But at the same time, the participant is able to recognize that they are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. In fact, they are doing more than the colleagues that are getting all of the recognition. And they're also recognizing that if by chance I fall off the wagon, I don't do what I'm supposed to be doing, well then I'm going to experience heightened scrutiny, and that will be vilified. So they talked about not having their grants or awards recognized in ways that their white colleagues' accomplishments are recognized, and many participants discussed ways that they were meeting the traditional metrics or even surpassing them, but still failed to receive even the smallest level of recognition that white colleagues received. The program that I run has been practically removed from the